The plane dropped so suddenly that my stomach seemed to rise into my throat, and for one terrifying second, every person around me screamed. The cabin lights flickered, luggage rattled violently above our heads, and the sound of the engines became a deep, frightening roar. Then I felt a hand close tightly around mine. It was my best friend, Daniel. His fingers were trembling, but he refused to let go. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and whispered the words I had never expected to hear from him: "If we don't make it, I love you." I wish I could say I had some beautiful response ready, but fear had stolen every word from my mind. I could only stare at him, realizing that the person who had been beside me through every heartbreak, every bad decision, every sleepless night, had just confessed the one thing neither of us had ever dared to say. And suddenly, the turbulence outside wasn't the only thing shaking my world. Before we continue, if stories about friendship, second chances, unexpected love, and the moments that change our lives touch your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear a story about second chances, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. Daniel and I had been best friends for 11 years. We met during our first week of college, when I accidentally spilled coffee across his notebook and expected him to hate me forever. Instead, he laughed, helped me clean it up, and somehow we became inseparable. Over the years, we learned everything about each other. He knew I hated thunderstorms. I knew he pretended not to care when he was hurt. He knew how I took my coffee. I knew exactly when he was lying about being okay. People constantly asked if we were secretly dating. We always laughed and denied it. Daniel would joke that we were practically siblings, and I would roll my eyes and tell everyone he was impossible to love. The truth was more complicated. Somewhere between late-night conversations, birthday surprises, shared secrets, and standing beside each other through painful relationships, something had quietly changed. I had started falling in love with him long before I understood what was happening. But I was afraid to admit it. A year earlier, I had gone through the worst breakup of my life. I had trusted someone completely, only to discover that he had been lying to me for months. After that, I built walls around my heart. Daniel was the only person who never tried to tear them down. He simply stayed. When I cried, he brought food. When I stopped answering messages, he showed up. When I told him I never wanted to love anyone again, he didn't argue. He just said that someday, when I was ready, someone would make love feel safe again. I never realized he was talking about himself. Months later, Daniel invited me on a short trip to visit a coastal town where he had spent summers as a child. I agreed because I needed a change of scenery, and because being with him always made life feel lighter. At the airport, we joked about how nervous I was about flying. Daniel promised he would distract me the entire flight. I teased him for being afraid of turbulence himself, even though he insisted he wasn't. Everything was normal until we reached cruising altitude. Outside the window, the sky was filled with thick gray clouds. The captain announced that we might experience some turbulence, but nothing serious was expected. I tried to relax. Daniel handed me his headphones and told me to close my eyes. Then the plane dropped. A violent jolt threw everyone against their seats. A child began crying somewhere behind us. A drink cart slammed against a wall. Oxygen masks didn't fall, but the sudden movement made people gasp and grab their armrests. The flight attendants immediately instructed everyone to remain seated. Another drop came. This time, I screamed. Daniel grabbed my hand. His palm was cold. His grip was so tight that my fingers hurt, but I didn't pull away. He kept looking at me instead of looking toward the windows. He told me to breathe slowly. I tried, but my chest felt trapped beneath an invisible weight. Then the plane shook again. Daniel leaned closer, and that's when he said it. "If we don't make it, I love you." For a moment, the entire world became silent. I knew the engines were roaring. I knew people were praying. I knew the plane was still moving through violent air. But all I could hear was those 5 words. I love you. The words I had secretly wanted to hear for years. I looked at him and asked if he meant it. His eyes filled with tears. He nodded and told me that he had loved me for longer than he could remember, but he had been terrified that telling me would destroy the friendship we had built. He said he would rather spend his whole life loving me silently than risk losing me completely. I started crying. Not because I thought we were going to die, but because I suddenly understood how much time we had wasted being afraid. I told him that I loved him too. His face changed instantly. Fear was still there, but something else appeared beneath it. Hope. The turbulence continued for several more minutes, each second stretching endlessly. We held hands and promised that if we landed safely, we would stop pretending. No more hiding behind jokes. No more calling ourselves just friends. No more waiting for the perfect moment. And then, almost as suddenly as it had started, the turbulence began to fade. The plane leveled. A collective sigh moved through the cabin. Some passengers laughed nervously. Others wiped tears from their faces. The captain apologized for the rough ride and assured everyone that we were safe. Daniel looked at me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. When the plane finally landed, I expected the relief to feel like the end of something. Instead, it felt like the beginning. We walked through the airport holding hands. For the first time in 11 years, neither of us cared who saw us. Outside, the evening air was cool, and the sky had turned orange above the distant buildings. Daniel stopped near the entrance and looked at me with the same nervous expression he had worn on the plane. He told me that he was still scared, not of flying anymore, but of changing everything between us. I smiled and told him that some things were worth being afraid of. Then I kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks or perfect music. It was simply 2 people who had spent years standing beside each other finally admitting that they wanted to stand together. Our relationship wasn't magically perfect after that day. We had awkward conversations. We worried about ruining what we had. Sometimes we argued. Sometimes old fears returned. But we learned something important: love doesn't always arrive like a lightning strike. Sometimes it grows quietly inside a friendship, hidden beneath years of laughter, loyalty, and ordinary moments. And sometimes it takes a terrifying moment to make us realize how much we have been afraid to say. Months later, we took another flight together. When the plane began shaking slightly, I instinctively reached for Daniel's hand. He smiled. This time, there was no fear in his eyes. I squeezed his fingers and whispered that I loved him. He laughed softly and said he had been waiting years to hear me say it without thinking the world was ending. We both laughed. But deep inside, I knew that the turbulence had given us something neither of us had known how to give ourselves: permission to stop waiting. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who has been afraid to confess what they truly feel, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Sometimes one small act of support can help a story reach someone who desperately needs its message. And before you leave, comment, "I choose love over fear," if you believe that life is too short to keep the people we love at a distance. Because sometimes the greatest second chance isn't getting another life. Sometimes it's getting the courage to finally live the life and love the heart has been quietly asking for all along.